Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mr. Midnight. I know many of you love winding down with these stories as you drift off to sleep, and I'm so glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can share many more nights together. Now find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's relax as we dive into tonight's case. Story number 1.
It was the morning of August 25th, 2017. A big storm, Hurricane Harvey, was about to hit Texas. Crystal McDowell sent a quick message to her ex-husband asking if he had enough drinking water for the kids. Then, she got in her black Mercedes and drove toward his house. She had plans that day, showing a house, getting things done, but she never showed up. She never answered her phone, and she never came home. As the rain started to fall harder, Crystal seemed to disappear without a trace. It would take hidden cameras, a child's quiet secret, and a terrible discovery in the woods to finally reveal the truth. This is the real story of Crystal McDowell, and the moment everything changed. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979 in Baytown, Texas. Her early years were anything but easy. Raised by her parents, Pamela and Anthony, Crystal's childhood was marked by instability. Both struggled with addiction and were unable to provide a stable home. Tragically, by the age of 11, Crystal lost both parents to apparent overdoses within months of each other. Following their deaths, she was taken in by her grandmother and later also raised by her uncle Jeff Walters. Despite the hardships, Crystal was known for her radiant smile, striking blue eyes, and a personality that could light up any room. Driven, upbeat, and adventurous, Crystal became a flight attendant, a job that perfectly suited her spirit. For years she traveled the country, experiencing new places and people. At some point during her journey, Crystal met Stephen Wayne McDowell, a man 7 years her senior. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his imposing build, Stephen charmed Crystal. After dating for some time, they married in April 2007. Stephen had a daughter from a previous marriage. He worked as a shipping manager but struggled to maintain steady employment. As a result, Crystal became the primary provider. While she thrived in her career, Stephen remained professionally unstable, creating a noticeable imbalance in the relationship. The couple welcomed 2 children together. Outwardly, their home life seemed harmonious. But behind closed doors, tension grew, particularly around Crystal's frequent travel. Stephen reportedly became increasingly jealous, suspecting her of affairs during her flights, though there was no evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal cherished her family deeply and prioritized stability, especially given her difficult upbringing. In 2016, Crystal made a life-changing decision. After 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she left the skies behind and joined her family's real estate business. This allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of permanence. Her uncle Jeff, proud of her decision, welcomed her as part of the 3rd generation in their real estate legacy. Crystal excelled quickly in her new role. Her charm, professionalism, and dedication made her a rising star in the local housing market. However, privately, she confided in close friends that the career change also served a strategic purpose. She believed that being rooted locally would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, the marriage had reached a breaking point. Crystal filed for divorce, citing years of emotional strain. On March 20th, she called 911 to report that Stephen had made threats against her and their children. Authorities treated the situation as a precaution rather than a criminal matter. At that point, there were no custody agreements in place, meaning Stephen still had the legal right to be with his children. Officers tried to reach him, but their efforts were unsuccessful. A few days later, he returned the children, and Crystal decided not to press charges, choosing instead to focus on de-escalating tensions for the sake of their kids. Those close to Crystal say she was doing everything she could to ensure the divorce remained civil. Her goal was always the well-being of her children. Stephen's adult daughter was disturbed by the events and asked her father why he was acting out. He claimed to be enraged over alleged affairs Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that no one in her circle believed to be true. People familiar with the couple agreed the relationship had been toxic for years. Even Stephen's daughter admitted that while she and Crystal got along wonderfully, the marriage had always been volatile. Despite their differences, the divorce, finalized in June 2017, appeared amicable on the surface. In fact, Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while she worked on renovating her own. However, beneath the appearance of civility, deeper issues lingered. Crystal often asked her family not to mention her plans or outings to Stephen, fearing he would lash out. Even something as innocent as spending time with a friend could trigger him. Although legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept reality. His social media activity revealed a disturbing pattern. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile photo to an image of a tombstone, then to one of Santa Muerte, before switching back to a picture of him and Crystal. His posts painted the picture of a happy, intact family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to support Stephen emotionally, checking in with him regularly. He assured her he was coming to terms with the separation and trying to get his life back on track. But his actions told a different story. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted about bringing Crystal coffee in bed and pampering her, as if their relationship was still intact. In a final attempt to maintain a peaceful co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a cruise with Stephen and the kids, but the closeness only blurred boundaries further. Then, in August 2017, something changed. Crystal, now 37, met Paul, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charismatic, driven, and shared Crystal's love for travel and adventure. Their bond was instant, and for the first time in a long while, Crystal felt genuinely happy. Though she told her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it private until she found the right moment to share it with Stephen. Despite being legally divorced, she still feared his reaction. That fear didn't stop her from publicly expressing her joy. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never been this happy and that her heart was full of a joy she never thought possible. "God is so good," she wrote. 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey loomed. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had stocked up on clean water for the kids and informed him she was heading to his house to shelter with them. She planned to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras captured the final known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels and holding her phone as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became concerned. They worked closely in the real estate business and spoke regularly. He tried calling her multiple times to inform her that the showing had been canceled due to the storm. When she didn't respond, Jeff reached out to Stephen, who replied with a suspicious text reportedly sent from Crystal's phone at 9:30 a.m., saying she planned to pick up the kids and head to Dallas. Jeff immediately grew suspicious. Crystal never changed plans without letting him know, and her phone was her lifeline. Work, appointments, everything was managed through it. Something didn't add up. Fearing the worst, he contacted the police to report her missing before noon that same day. On August 26th, as floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and two family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house for over a week, but his daughter told Jeff otherwise. She had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy visited Stephen's home for a welfare check. When authorities entered Stephen McDowell's home, they found not only Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, but also her purse and handbag, clear signs she had recently been there. For her Uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was undeniable. Stephen was involved in her disappearance. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Hurricane Harvey had devastated the region. Many law enforcement officers, first responders, and even district officials were dealing with flooded homes and emergency rescues. As a result, the investigation stalled before it could even begin. Desperate for answers, Jeff turned to the media, hoping to raise awareness and generate leads. But his efforts were drowned out, literally, by round-the-clock storm coverage. With days passing and no progress, he hired a private investigator, frustrated by the silence from local authorities. This move sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney strongly objected to an outside investigator entering Crystal's home, arguing that critical evidence could be compromised or destroyed. Tensions between the McDowell family, law enforcement, and even local media in Houston escalated. Refusing to back down, Jeff and Crystal's new partner, Paul, teamed up to raise a $15,000 reward for any credible information. They launched a social media campaign that finally drew public attention. But in the eyes of investigators, suspicion fell not only on Stephen, but also on Jeff and Paul. Despite Jeff's relentless search for Crystal, law enforcement treated him with skepticism. Whispers about his private life, namely his same-sex relationships, circulated in the conservative town of Bedtime. Some believed those biases colored the way authorities viewed his involvement. The local police commander even dismissed Jeff's concerns in a national broadcast, calling him overly emotional and an obstacle to the case. Paul Hargrave wasn't spared either. After submitting to a polygraph with inconclusive results, his credibility was questioned. He worsened things in the investigators' eyes by sending surveillance footage from his home to news stations instead of turning it over directly to law enforcement. Paul defended his actions, saying he tried to provide the videos to the sheriff's office but felt ignored, so he took his case to the public to clear his name. And then there was Stephen. Despite his emotionally manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal ever left him, he was seen by investigators as polite, helpful, and cooperative. While family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and marked by control, authorities didn't view Stephen as a potential threat or a man seeking revenge over the divorce. That all began to change on Tuesday, August 29th. As the floodwaters receded, a family friend spotted Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a rundown motel, an area flagged during the online campaign. The car doors were unlocked, and the keys sat in the console. Investigators believed it had been staged for theft, but due to the storm's impact, the flooded lot had made the car inaccessible. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she vanished. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He didn't buy gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car remained untouched. Even more chilling, other surveillance captured a hooded figure, matching Stephen's build, riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The clues were adding up, and for the first time, all eyes turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a potential suspect in a case that had stayed quiet for far too long. The investigation took a dramatic turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart located just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was found showed a man resembling Stephen McDowell purchasing a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid in cash, and the timing aligned perfectly with the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this damning evidence, Stephen denied any involvement in Crystal's disappearance. Authorities, citing a lack of direct proof, allowed him to return home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Jeff, her uncle, reminded the district attorney that Crystal had previously filed a report stating Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she ever left him. To Jeff, the man's mental and emotional instability was undeniable. It wasn't until September 8th, nearly 2 weeks after she vanished, that the district attorney finally intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. Yet even then, Stephen dictated the terms. He asked to return home for one final night, to put things in order, and promised to confess the next morning. Jeff and other loved ones were furious. They believed this unsupervised time could give Stephen an opportunity to take his own life and escape justice. But on September 9th, 2017, Stephen kept his word. He returned to the station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal informed him she was taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on an upcoming family trip, and not him. She had just returned from spending time with Paul, which enraged Stephen. As their children slept upstairs, he attacked her from behind and strangled her to death. After the murder, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and before sunrise, drove to a wooded area near his home where he disposed of her remains. Even with the confession, Stephen refused to disclose the location of the body unless prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Given the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities feared the body would be impossible to locate without his help. They agreed to the deal. Later that day, Stephen led authorities to a remote, overgrown area. Crystal's remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, then 44, was charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which he was unable to pay. Beyond the jealousy and rage, the case revealed a more sobering truth. Without Crystal, Stephen had no means of financial support for himself or his children. Justice, however, moved slowly. The trial didn't begin until June 2019. During that time, Stephen showed no remorse. In court, he attempted to portray himself as a broken man, claiming he acted in a sudden fit of passion, a legal strategy in Texas that, if accepted, could drastically reduce his sentence. He even alleged that Crystal's death resulted from a consensual encounter gone wrong. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative, emphasizing the long-standing emotional abuse and control he had exerted throughout their relationship. Stephen's legal team tried to smear Crystal's reputation, introducing unverified texts and claims of infidelity. But those closest to her stood firm. They painted a very different picture. Crystal was vibrant, caring, and deeply committed to her children. They testified about the dysfunction and manipulation she endured for years. One of the most heartbreaking moments during the trial came when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand and shared something devastating. In December 2017, Maui, then just 5 years old, confided in Mandy that she was ready to reveal her secret. Mandy had no idea what to expect. Gently encouraging the girl to speak, she listened in shock as Maui described waking up the morning her mother vanished. She recalled hearing her parents fighting. She wandered past the bathroom and into the bedroom. There, she saw Stephen push Crystal onto the bed and place his hands over her nose and mouth. Maui stood at the edge of the bed as her mother looked at her, until her eyes stopped moving. Then Stephen turned to his daughter, told her to go upstairs, and warned her never to speak about what she saw. Mandy immediately alerted authorities. Maui was placed into trauma counseling, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Another key witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. She recalled helping Crystal move out of the home when tensions with Stephen became unbearable, and then helping her move back in when Stephen threatened to end his life if she didn't return. Cherry testified that after the divorce, Stephen continued to manipulate Crystal emotionally, even starving himself to make her feel responsible for his well-being. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's home. He was pacing nervously, trembling, and crying. Maui told them she had seen her mom the day before, then pointed to a black dress in a closet and said, "The bad spirits took her." The scene was chilling. Melissa and Jeff immediately called the police from outside the home, begging them to remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their pleas were ignored. Melissa also testified about the family cruise Stephen had proposed, a last-ditch effort to stage a peaceful goodbye. Crystal reluctantly agreed, but made it clear, no threats, no manipulation, no harm. As the trip neared, another argument, this time over money, convinced her to cancel. She realized Stephen wasn't trying to say goodbye. He wanted to win her back. Then came one of the most damning testimonies. An inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen revealed that Stephen had confessed in detail to killing Crystal. The motive? A text message from another man. The inmate recalled Stephen saying he used zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after she died, a detail only the forensic team had previously confirmed. Texas Department of Public Safety officials confirmed other pieces of Stephen's confession. He told them Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They fought. She told him she never truly loved him and that he needed to move on. In a rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial ended swiftly. In just 3.5 hours, the jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder. On September 10, 2019, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He must serve at least 25 before being eligible for parole, making his potential release date 2042. Crystal's family was devastated by what they saw as a lenient sentence. Her uncle Jeff shouted in court that Stephen deserved worse. Others were frustrated, believing a life sentence or the death penalty should have been on the table. But those options had been taken off due to the deal Stephen struck in exchange for revealing where he had hidden Crystal's body. The family's biggest concern, however, wasn't the length of the sentence. It was the emotional toll on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, Maui and Madden had suffered an unimaginable loss. Crystal had always centered her life around them, and now they were left navigating trauma most adults couldn't bear. By 2020, Mandy Avalos, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was taking steps to adopt them legally. Some sources describe Mandy as Crystal's childhood best friend, while others claimed they had once been romantic partners. Regardless of their past, Mandy remained Crystal's most trusted person, and her devotion to the children was unwavering.
Story number 2.
It was a normal Tuesday evening at Harvey Nichols, a fancy department store in London. The day was winding down and most of the workers were getting ready to go home. Claire Bernal, just 22 years old, was at her usual spot at the beauty counter. She smiled at a co-worker nearby, thinking the day was almost over. But then, in just a few seconds, everything changed. Loud bangs rang through the store. People screamed. Workers ran. It was chaos. What happened that night shocked everyone who knew Claire. But the truth is, the trouble didn't start that day. It had been building for a long time. There were signs. There were warnings. And there was someone Claire had been afraid of for months. So who was he? What led to that awful moment? And why didn't anyone stop it? This is the heartbreaking story of Claire Bernal. Claire Bernal was born in July 1983 in the charming town of Groombridge in the UK. Her parents, Tricia and Martin Bernal, raised her in a loving and peaceful home. From an early age, Claire's love for beauty and creativity began to shine. She went to St. Gregory's Roman Catholic Comprehensive School in Tunbridge Wells, where she was known for her gentle nature and bright spirit. After finishing school, she continued her education at West Kent College. It was there she decided to pursue her passion further and enrolled in a beauty therapy program. Claire had always been fascinated by makeup. As a child, she'd spend hours in front of the mirror, carefully applying makeup with a sparkle in her eye. Her mom, Tricia, often said Claire had a natural gift. She could bring out beauty in anyone. That passion eventually turned into a career goal, and with her diploma in hand, Claire was ready to step into the world of beauty consulting. Those who knew her best described Claire as sweet, gentle, and impossibly kind. She avoided conflict, smiled with genuine warmth, and radiated calm. She had a humble heart and a desire to make the world just a little softer. Her kindness made her a beloved presence wherever she went, but it also meant she sometimes saw the world through rose-colored glasses. Still, she stayed true to herself, quiet, shy, and never one to speak ill of others. Claire had also dabbled in theater makeup, and when she saw a job listing for a beauty consultant at the prestigious Harvey Nichols store in London, she immediately applied. The upscale department store, known for its luxury brands and elite clientele, felt like the perfect fit for her. She walked into her interview fully prepared, and her enthusiasm for the role left a lasting impression. Shortly after, she received the call she had hoped for. She got the job. Overjoyed, Claire called her friend Adam Ward before the interview, full of nerves, unsure how she had done. Adam reassured her that her doubt was just part of who she was. She always gave her best, but never believed it was enough. When she got the job, Adam couldn't have been happier. Soon after landing the role, Claire moved into a flat in South London, sharing the space with 2 roommates. Living in London was a dream come true. She embraced the energy of the city and flourished in her new life. Claire loved her work, and it showed. Customers adored her, colleagues respected her, and it was clear she was made for this world. Soft-spoken and modest, yet driven and talented, Claire made it her goal to help every woman feel confident and beautiful. In July 2005, for her birthday, Claire and her mom went on a getaway to Florence, Italy. It was a magical 5-day trip, filled with sightseeing, laughter, and endless memories. For Tricia, those days were priceless. She and Claire were incredibly close, not just mother and daughter, but true best friends. Looking back, Tricia remembers that trip as one of the happiest times in her daughter's life, but that joy would be shattered just 2 months later. On September 13th, 2005, Claire was nearing the end of her shift at Harvey Nichols. She was tired and looking forward to a quiet evening at home. Standing all day at the makeup counter was no easy feat, and she was ready to unwind. Victoria Daniels, a colleague working just a few counters away, recalled seeing Claire cleaning up and smiling at her as if to say, "Almost done." That was the last moment of calm before chaos erupted. Victoria noticed a man approaching Claire. Everything happened in a blink. She saw something dark in his hand, a flash, and then came the sound. Loud, sharp bangs echoed through the store. Panic broke out instantly. Shoppers and staff ran for cover. Witnesses later said 5 shots rang out, and then a terrible silence. Police arrived within minutes. Inside, they found a scene no one could ever forget. 2 people lay on the floor. One was Claire Bernal, just 22 years old. The other was a man whose injuries were self-inflicted. The man was quickly identified by store staff. It was 30-year-old Michael Petch, a security guard who worked at Harvey Nichols. Authorities now understood. Michael had targeted Claire and then taken his own life. When officers delivered the heartbreaking news to Tricia Bernal, she was devastated. Through her tears, she asked one haunting question. It was Michael Peck, wasn't it? Everyone, Tricia, the staff, even the police, knew Michael's name. But no one could fully grasp why this had happened, why someone so gentle and full of life was taken in such a violent way. The horrifying truth was that Claire had been living through months of fear, emotional torment, and harassment, all centered around Michael. Their paths crossed by chance at Harvey Nichols in London, where Claire worked as a beauty consultant and Michael was employed as a security guard. Originally from the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Michael held citizenship in both countries. He had once served in the Slovakian army, but was discharged. He'd also worked as a security guard at the U.S. Embassy before moving to the UK and settling in North London. Around this time, he joined the security team at Harvey Nichols. When Michael saw Claire, he became instantly drawn to her kind and soft-spoken nature. The two began chatting occasionally, and in January 2005, Michael asked Claire out. She agreed, and over the course of 3 weeks, they went on 3 dates. But even early on, Claire's mother, Tricia, didn't feel right about the man. He was older, recently separated, and something about him didn't sit well with her. Still, Claire wasn't deeply invested in the relationship. According to her family, she enjoyed the attention, but didn't feel the same intensity Michael did. Michael, however, quickly became infatuated. He showered Claire with praise and even declared his love for her after just a few outings. Claire liked him well enough at first, but things began to shift. Very quickly, she saw a possessive, jealous side emerge. He demanded her time, grew upset when she spent time with loved ones, and pushed boundaries. Tricia later recalled that Claire had noticed red flags even after the first date. She simply hadn't expected the situation to spiral out of control so fast. The relationship became overwhelming. After returning from a trip to Slovakia, Michael insisted Claire collect him from the airport and pressured her to let him stay at her place, despite their short-lived connection. Claire refused, walking him to the train station and calmly telling him she wasn't interested in seeing him anymore. But Michael didn't take no for an answer. He began bombarding Claire with calls. When she didn't respond, he showed up outside her home and waited there for 2 hours, yelling and demanding to see her. Neighbors and Claire's roommates overheard his shouting. It wasn't until one of the roommates confronted him and said Claire didn't want to see him that he finally left. The next day, Claire hoped that would be the end of it. But instead, Michael showed up again, this time holding a large bouquet and following her to and from work. He pleaded with her to give him another chance, but she continued to say no. His behavior intensified. Claire's phone was overwhelmed with calls, sometimes up to 50 in a single day. His voicemails became increasingly disturbing. He began making up fantasies, saying things like, "Tomorrow's our anniversary. How should we celebrate?" And then came a chilling message: "If I can't have you, no one will." Claire was terrified. At one point, she even changed her phone number, but Michael somehow got the new one and resumed his obsessive communication. Work became unbearable. Michael would stare at her through mirrors or glass, and even tried to get other staff members to convince her to speak to him. On one occasion, she gave in and spoke to him briefly. That's when he cornered her, pinned her against the wall, and declared she loved him too. When she denied it, he exploded with rage, screaming, "Yes, you do, you stupid little girl." Michael, the very person who was supposed to protect people in the store, was now the source of Claire's fear. And she had nowhere to turn except the police. For 2 months, Claire lived in constant fear. Her performance at work suffered. She was late, distracted, and emotionally drained. She always felt like someone was watching her, because someone was. In March 2005, something truly terrifying happened. Claire was walking home when she spotted Michael tailing her. She got on a train to lose him, but he followed. When they both got off at the next station, he grabbed her by the arm. She threatened to call the police, and his response sent shivers down her spine. "If you report me, I'll kill you." Frozen, Claire didn't know what to do. Michael smiled in a twisted, unsettling way before exiting the train, never taking his eyes off her. Claire ran home and collapsed in tears. She told her mother everything: the stalking, the threats, the emotional torment. It had all reached a dangerous breaking point. And tragically, that fear turned out to be justified. Claire's family felt utterly powerless. Watching someone they loved unravel under the weight of fear and stress was devastating. Claire wasn't sleeping well, and her anxiety had grown unbearable. More than anything, she just wanted Michael to leave her alone. But by then, she was too scared to even involve the police. The fear of what he might do held her back. Eventually, Claire came to a hard truth. Trying to reason with Michael was useless. So she decided to seek help from her employers at Harvey Nichols. After 2 long months of relentless stalking, she brought the situation to their attention. Fortunately, the store's head of security, himself a former police officer, took Claire's concerns seriously. He began monitoring Michael through CCTV footage. After seeing the disturbing behavior firsthand, he and the rest of the team agreed that Michael needed to be relocated to another floor in the store, believing this would keep Claire safe. But Michael wasn't deterred. He still knew where she lived, and even after being moved at work, he continued to stalk her. Once Harvey Nichols officials realized the extent of his actions, they suspended him. From there, the head of security urged Claire to go to the authorities. Though she hesitated, embarrassed, unsure, and just wanting the nightmare to end, she did eventually file a report with the police. That decision would later prove to be both courageous and heartbreaking. Michael was arrested soon after, at the very store where he had once worked. Officers placed him in handcuffs and escorted him out. He was immediately fired. But what stayed with Claire the most wasn't his arrest. It was the look he gave her as they put him in the back of the police car. Cold and bitter, his eyes burned with anger, silently blaming her for it all. Shaken, Claire called her mother right away. Tricia recalled Claire saying she didn't want Michael to get into trouble, but she felt like she had no choice. He simply wouldn't stop. Even after everything he'd done, Claire still worried about him. At the police station, Michael was questioned, and disturbingly, he tried to flip the story. He claimed that he had ended things with Claire and that she was the one who couldn't let go. It was a twisted version of events, and with no hard evidence besides Claire's statement, the police released him. He was given a restraining order, banned from going near Claire's home, workplace, or even being in her general area. But Michael had no intention of following the rules. Just 2 days later, he was spotted outside Claire's apartment, casually waving at her. When the police were called, he disappeared before they arrived. Another incident followed soon after. This time, he was arrested for violating his bail conditions. As officers led him away, he smiled at Claire once more, a chilling reminder that he wasn't done. Michael spent 8 days in custody. But before the trial, he was released again while the court prepared a pre-sentence report. His next court date was scheduled for September 21st. This time, too, the conditions of his bail barred him from contacting Claire or going near her. But the decision to release him again baffled everyone. Michael had already proven that he would ignore the law. Why grant him another chance? It's hard to say exactly why. Maybe Claire, being as gentle and kind as she was, downplayed the severity of his behavior. Or maybe the officials in charge of his case failed to grasp the danger she was truly in. But after his second release, Michael didn't go straight back to stalking. Instead, he vanished for a while, flying to Slovakia. On the surface, it seemed like a trip to visit family, but that wasn't his reason. Michael went there to attend a firearms training course. It was around the same time that Claire and Tricia were enjoying their vacation in Florence, Italy. They laughed, took photos, and cherished the time together, completely unaware that it would be their last trip. While they made beautiful memories, Michael was preparing something horrifying, something that no one saw coming. Somehow, Michael Peck managed to travel from Slovakia back to the UK with a firearm hidden in his luggage. He had acquired the weapon during his time abroad and, disturbingly, was able to smuggle it out of the country without raising any red flags. By August 31st, the date of his scheduled court hearing, Claire had emotionally braced herself to testify, though the thought of seeing Michael again filled her with dread. But a call from the magistrate's court brought unexpected news. Michael had entered a guilty plea. There would be no trial. While this brought some relief to Claire, it also left her unsettled. Despite pleading guilty, Michael was allowed to remain free until his sentencing, set for September 21st. For Claire, this meant 3 more weeks of uncertainty. At first, those weeks felt oddly peaceful. Nearly 2 weeks went by with no signs of Michael. For the first time in months, Claire began to feel like herself again, light, hopeful, even happy. But that calm was tragically short-lived. September 13th would become the day that shattered everything. Michael had stopped stalking Claire, not because he had let go, but because he was waiting for the right moment to act out the violent obsession that had consumed him. Just before closing time at Harvey Nichols, it's believed that Michael, possibly under the influence of drugs, snuck in through a rear entrance. Armed and determined, he approached the beauty counter where Claire was working. Then, without hesitation, he opened fire. 4 bullets struck Claire. She died at the scene. Seconds later, Michael turned the gun on himself and ended his life too. The horror unfolded in front of colleagues and customers. Many witnessed the attack firsthand and were left permanently traumatized. The scene was brutal, the pain immeasurable. Michael Peck, a disturbed and obsessive man, couldn't handle rejection. Rather than accepting it and moving on, he made Claire pay with her life. And in his final act, he stole any chance of justice or accountability. Everyone was left stunned, heartbroken, furious. And yet, for many, this outcome wasn't entirely surprising. Too often, stalking is dismissed as harmless or not taken seriously enough by authorities. In Claire's case, she did everything right. She tried to distance herself. She went to her employers. She filed police reports. But time and time again, the system failed to protect her. Michael was granted bail repeatedly, despite clear warning signs. The restraining orders and court conditions meant nothing to him. They were just empty promises printed on paper. Claire's funeral, held just weeks later, was unbearably heartbreaking. Her parents, shattered by the loss, watched their beloved daughter, once vibrant, full of life, lowered into the earth. Friends and family gathered to say goodbye to a young woman with so much left to experience, a future that was stolen in a single act of violence. But the pain didn't stop there. Claire's death caused a painful divide between her grieving parents. At the inquest, her father Martin, Trisha's former husband, criticized her, claiming she had underestimated the danger Claire was in. He also condemned the police for their failure to perform a proper risk assessment during the investigation. Martin revealed that Claire had been staying with him in her final days, yet she hadn't told him what she was going through. He believed that if he had known, things might have turned out differently. When Trisha took the stand, she broke down in tears. She admitted she had put too much faith in the system. "I had an extremely close relationship with my daughter," she said. "I thought the police had it under control. That was my mistake, and I have to live with that." It was a heartbreaking moment, two parents united in loss, but divided by pain. The truth is, no one was to blame but Michael, and yet, grief has a way of distorting everything. After Claire's death, Trisha turned her pain into purpose. She began campaigning for change, determined to make sure other families wouldn't suffer the same way. She joined forces with relatives of other stalking victims and helped establish the Family Justice Center, a support network advocating for victims of stalking and domestic violence. The group pushed for a new law that would officially classify stalking as a criminal offense. In 2012, after years of advocacy, that goal was finally achieved. Stalking was made a crime in the UK. It was a long overdue step, but even now progress remains slow. Despite the law, countless victims still feel ignored. Many say that unless violence actually occurs, the authorities remain reluctant to step in. Monsters like Michael thrive in that gap, where behavior is terrifying, but not yet classified as criminal. No one should live in fear because someone refuses to let go. No one has the right to terrorize another human being because of wounded pride. It's unbearable to know that Claire did everything she could to stay safe, and still, the system failed her. Michael didn't just take Claire's life, he took her future, her family's joy, and any chance at closure. And for what? He could have simply disappeared. But instead, he chose to destroy everything she had. Claire Bernal's story should never be forgotten. It stands as a powerful call for change and a reminder that stalking is not harmless. It's a crime, a deadly one.
Story number 3.
In early June 2014, some highway workers were out cutting grass in Geneva, Wisconsin. It was just a normal day until they spotted something strange lying near the edge of the road. 2 suitcases, one purple, one black. At first, they thought maybe someone had just dumped them. But as they got closer, they noticed a terrible smell and flies swarming all around. When the police showed up and opened those suitcases, what they found inside was horrifying. It would kick off a major investigation that stretched across states and uncover the dark past of a man no one ever suspected. But at that point, no one knew just how twisted the story would get. In early June 2014, road maintenance crews were trimming grass along a Walworth County highway. It was routine work until one of the workers noticed something disturbing by the roadside. 2 suitcases, one purple, the other black, had been abandoned in the brush. Their presence alone raised suspicions, but the strong odor and swarm of flies surrounding them made it clear something was terribly wrong. A police officer was dispatched to the scene. Upon arriving, he unzipped the purple suitcase and was met with a horrifying discovery: a woman's body inside a black trash bag. The black suitcase held a second woman's body. One of them was in an advanced state of decomposition, with her hands bound behind her back by rope. The other woman was found naked, wearing a collar with a rope around her neck. Both had clearly been deceased for some time. The area was immediately cordoned off, and a full-scale investigation was launched. A bulletin was issued across the Midwest. 2 unidentified female victims had been found. The call for help prompted a flood of missing persons reports from departments across the region. Authorities now had to comb through countless names and details, hoping to match them to the victims. Investigators began analyzing the ropes used to bind the women, looking for clues, any trace evidence or DNA that might lead to the killer. Within just a day, they were able to identify one of the victims, thanks to her distinctive tattoos. She was Laura Simonson, a 37-year-old mother of 7 from Farmington, Minnesota. Her family had reported her missing on November 22, 2013. The police had traced her last known movements to the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Hotel staff confirmed that she had stayed there on November 2nd and 3rd, and security footage revealed she wasn't alone. A man had checked in with her, paid in cash, and refused to register under his own name. The next day, he was seen leaving alone, pushing a trolley loaded with bags. Laura was never seen again. By mid-January, a tip came in naming a man, Stephen Zellick, as someone Laura might have been with. The detective in charge of the case contacted the West Allis police to check on Zellick's residence, but no trace of Laura was found. Weeks later, after Zellick failed to respond to a letter, the FBI and Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation visited his home. Zellick admitted to being at the Rochester motel with Laura, but claimed they parted ways afterward. He denied any romantic involvement and insisted he hadn't seen her since. Then, in April 2014, just weeks before Laura's body was discovered, a disturbing post appeared on a classified ad website. It accused Stephen Zellick of being a sadist who had enslaved a woman named Laura Simonson. The post claimed she was being held naked, shackled, and abused, and it called for people to harass Zellick to pressure him into releasing her. It included his phone number, email, and linked him to a BDSM website where he allegedly used the username Mr. Handcuffs. At the time, no one knew who authored the post, but it became chillingly relevant once Laura's remains were found. But the horror didn't end there. Investigators still had to identify the second victim, known only as Jane Doe. She was estimated to be between 15 and 35 years old, weighing around 120 to 140 pounds. She had an overbite, 2 piercings in each ear, and a small heart tattoo on her lower left pelvis. A forensic sketch was released in hopes of identifying her. Eventually, the sketch reached friends and family of Jenny Games in Oregon, who believed it was her. Dental records from a foster parent confirmed her identity. Jenny was 19, a student from Cottage Grove, Oregon. Her friends described her as cheerful and full of life. Jenny had a young son but had lost custody. She also had a tough upbringing, spending time in multiple foster homes. Though Jenny had stayed in touch sporadically, her loved ones hadn't reported her missing, believing she had simply moved on. She graduated from an alternative high school with honors and earned a college scholarship. Those who knew her remembered her as resilient and optimistic. Now, detectives had to figure out how Jenny had ended up dead and who was responsible. They uncovered that both Laura and Jenny had been active on the same BDSM website and had interacted with the same man, Stephen Zellick. In one message to him, Laura had written that if he ever killed her, no one would ever find her. The man's email was traced to a West Allis apartment. Authorities placed him under surveillance and tracked his vehicle. When he returned home from work, police were waiting. He denied ever meeting Laura in person, but agreed to submit a DNA sample. He admitted to having an interest in BDMS since he was 19 and said it had been part of his life ever since. But investigators knew better: his online alias, his connection to both women, and now the physical evidence were painting a much darker picture. On an obscure corner of the internet, Steven Zellick maintained a disturbing profile. His online presence left no ambiguity. He was searching for a permanent 24/7 slave, someone willing to surrender their autonomy completely. His words painted a dark picture. I seek a no-limits, irreversible form of slavery, captivity, dehumanization. That's what I'm after. He described the ideal state of a submissive, restrained with ropes, hooded, caged, or paraded by a collar and leash, bound in wrist and ankle restraints. According to him, this wasn't just a preference, it was a lifestyle, and one he was determined to find someone to share. What Zellick didn't realize was that, despite all his precautions, the digital trail he tried so desperately to erase still lingered. His computer had been equipped with software that constantly wiped data. Tens of thousands of deletions were logged, but the authorities had access to Laura Simonson's laptop, which had retained copies of their online conversations. Even worse for him, investigators had already collected footage from the hotel surveillance cameras. He was seen checking in with Laura, hard proof they'd been together. But circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to secure a conviction. Detectives needed something indisputable to tie him to the two dead women. That's when forensic analysis of the rope used to bind Jenny Games revealed a crucial breakthrough. DNA found on the cord matched that of Steven Zellick. With this confirmation, police obtained a warrant to search his West Allis apartment. What they found was unsettling. The unit itself was grimy, but tucked away were cleaning agents, bleach, and other tools typically used to scrub away evidence. Investigators also found one of the very suitcases used to transport the bodies. Inside it, sex toys, bondage devices, and a legitimate police badge. The man at the center of this investigation wasn't just a fantasist hiding behind a screen. He had once been a police officer. Zellick had served with the West Allis Police Department from 1989 until he resigned in 2001. But his record was far from clean. Internal affairs documents painted a troubling picture. He had misused his authority, stalked women while on duty, and accessed confidential records to find their personal details. Altogether, 10 disciplinary actions had been documented during his time in uniform. Allegations ranged from intimidation to abuse of sensitive police databases for personal use. A recorded conversation between Zellick and his police chief captures a tense exchange. The chief questioned the appropriateness of repeatedly approaching women while on duty. Zellick claimed his behavior was never improper. Very casual, he said. But the complaints from local businesses and individuals painted a much different picture. In May 2001, one dancer accused him of offering $300 for a private show. She agreed to visit his home. Once there, she claimed to hear the sound of handcuffs being readied. Fearing what was about to happen, she tried to flee, only for Zellick to allegedly throw her to the ground and choke her. She managed to escape and pounded on a neighbor's door, shouting that he was going to kill her. Zellick insisted she was trying to rob him. In the end, no charges were filed against him, but she was arrested on an unrelated prostitution warrant. Just a few months later, he quietly resigned from the police force. That resignation allowed him to sidestep disciplinary action and maintain a clean enough record to later secure a private security license. A former roommate, Jamie, who had once dated him before they decided to remain friends, later revealed chilling details. She had found a large wire cage in his basement, along with various BDM gear. According to Jamie, Zelik had confided that for 7 years, he kept a woman imprisoned in that cage while still serving as a police officer. Fearing for her own safety and that of her children, Jamie waited until he left for work, then packed up her things, loaded a U-Haul, and left without looking back. In January, the same time he was being questioned about Laura Simonson, Zelik posted on another forum, this time claiming he was in search of an owner himself. He wrote that he was looking to be enslaved, caged, and reduced to an animalistic state. He described an ideal life of captivity on a farm or in a cell. Despite the eerie nature of his online activity, few could have predicted what would happen next. On June 25th, just after 8 a.m., authorities from Walworth County arrived at his apartment complex in West Allis. Armed officers with shields and a battering ram stormed the unit. Witnesses watched in shock as officers poured in, later exiting with evidence bags and Zelik's refrigerator. Stephen Zelik, now 52, was arrested on 2 counts of concealing a corpse. His quiet life as a security guard had been a mask. Though he had worked at a security company since 2007, his co-workers described him as peculiar. Even on the very day he discarded the bodies, Zelik had been chatting online. The district attorney later revealed he had messaged a woman named Petra that same day. In the conversation, he expressed a desire to keep her in absolute captivity, saying he was ready to start planning her dehumanization. The picture of Stephen Zelik became clearer with every new piece of evidence. Files documenting his history spanned hundreds of pages, from his initial application to the police department in 1989 to his resignation letter in 2001. In the earlier years of his police career, Stephen had been described in annual evaluations as professional, respectful, and dependable. But as the late 1990s rolled into the early 2000s, a darker side of his behavior began to emerge. Complaints started to surface. Multiple women came forward, reporting that Zelik had followed and harassed them while he was on duty. According to prosecutors, his story with Jenny Games when she was just 16 and still in the foster care system. She and Zelik first connected through a bondage-themed website. Their communication paused and then resumed when she turned 18. He convinced her to come live with him in Wisconsin, encouraging her to delete her social media and disconnect from people she knew. In August 2012, Jenny boarded a one-way flight to Milwaukee, telling her family she was enrolling in welding school. Zelik picked her up at the airport and they checked into a hotel in Kenosha. Later, he would tell police that they had engaged in breath play, a risky practice involving restricted breathing. He claimed that during a session, he lost control while she was tied up and blindfolded, unintentionally strangling her. His attorney argued that what followed was panic. He placed her body in a suitcase and brought it back to his apartment, storing it in his refrigerator. Jenny's remains stayed there for over a year. As the body began to decompose, the fridge could no longer stay shut, so he taped it closed. After his arrest, Zelik confessed to his involvement in Jenny's death, but the police emphasized that they still needed to determine whether it met the legal definition of homicide. Jenny, originally from Cottage Grove, Oregon, had told family in late 2012 that she was relocating, her way of protecting them, but also the reason they never filed a missing persons report. Friends remembered her as big-hearted and full of good intentions. But when authorities questioned Zelik, he couldn't even recall her name. Jenny's body remained in the refrigerator until Laura Simonson entered the picture. Like Jenny, Laura had met Zelik online. The two arranged to meet at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Zelik once again encouraged her to delete her social media, sell her car, and cut all ties. According to his account, Laura also died during a breath control session. Another accident, he claimed. Laura was discovered naked, with a gag in her mouth attached to a collar. Jenny's body was wrapped in plastic, her hands bound behind her. After Laura died, Zellick packed both women into suitcases, placed them in his trunk, and drove them to a remote stretch of Como Road in Geneva, Wisconsin. That's where he left them, in plain view near a ditch. Zellick later admitted he simply decided one day that it was time to get rid of the bodies. Oddly, the area where he dumped the suitcases was only a short distance from the local police station. Prosecutors said this was no coincidence. They argued he chose that spot in a moment of carelessness, or perhaps arrogance. Despite the gruesome details, Zellick's defense team painted a different picture. They claimed the deaths were accidents, not crimes, and that by leaving the suitcases in the open, he hadn't tried to hide anything. They argued he wasn't trying to conceal the bodies, just to be rid of them. Zellick was formally charged with 2 counts of hiding a corpse. His defense attorney requested a $50,000 bond, citing his college education and community ties. But the judge wasn't convinced. Bail was set at $1 million. The judge said the high bail was necessary, both to ensure public safety and prevent Zellick from fleeing the jurisdiction. At that point, the only charges filed were related to concealment of the bodies. But given the evidence piling up, particularly the similarities in how both women died, that would soon change. On Tuesday, August 5th, Stephen Zellick was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide and hiding a corpse in connection with the death of Jenny Games. The charges marked a turning point in a case already steeped in horror. Because Laura Simonson had died in Minnesota, legal proceedings for her case were being handled there and were paused until the Wisconsin trial concluded. Kenosha County District Attorney emphasized that Laura's death had been critical in unraveling the truth behind both killings. Zellick had quickly become a suspect in her disappearance, especially after security footage showed the two checking into a hotel together. These deaths were accidents or the result of misjudged games. Laura's family described her as a fragile individual, someone who had struggled with mental illness. Her father revealed that she had been posting escort ads on Craigslist, and in 2010, her children were placed in his custody. The family had already endured a heartbreaking loss when Laura's 13-year-old daughter, Elissa, who had disabilities, passed away in June 2013. In the months that followed, Laura's other daughter, Kaylee, launched an online fundraiser seeking help for her grieving mother. "She's homeless, her car is falling apart, and it's the only shelter she has," Kaylee wrote. The campaign never raised funds, but by fall, Laura was living with her own mother, Mary, in Farmington. On November 2nd, she left to meet someone she had only known online, Stephen Zellick. 20 days later, her disappearance was officially reported. Prosecutors were preparing to argue that the killings were calculated. Zellick, they said, intentionally targeted women who were isolated or vulnerable, encouraged them to sever their digital and personal connections, and ultimately used methods of killing that left minimal forensic evidence. Zellick's background in law enforcement may have helped him both commit the crimes and manipulate the investigation. Then came an unexpected twist. On the very day jury selection was set to begin, Zellick reached a plea agreement. In a move that stunned even his own legal team, the former West Allis police officer pled guilty to killing 19-year-old Jenny Games. Her remains had been discovered in a suitcase off a Wisconsin highway in Walworth County in 2014. The plea meant that Zellick, then 54 years old, was facing a potential 75-year prison sentence. The state planned to seek the full term, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The original charge of first-degree intentional homicide was reduced as part of the plea deal. Zellick admitted guilt to first-degree reckless homicide with the use of a dangerous weapon, the rope used in Jenny's death, and to hiding her body. In total, he received 35 years in prison, with 10 additional years of supervised release. An extra 5 years were added concurrently for the charge of concealing a corpse. During sentencing, Zellick showed little emotion. He did offer a brief apology, describing Jenny as a good person. But the prosecution portrayed him as a predator, someone who had deliberately sought out women on the margins of society, then used their trust to destroy them. "I would undo it if I could," Zellick said, insisting her death had not been intentional. The district attorney later said he was satisfied with the sentence, believing it would ensure public safety. Zellick's defense lawyer, Jonathan Smith, urged the judge to consider that Laura's death happened later and should not weigh into Jenny's case. But the judge disagreed. Then it was time for the trial for Laura Simonson's murder. Now 55, Zellick pled guilty to second-degree murder with intent in her death. For that, he received a 25-year prison sentence. Although the judge acknowledged that Zellick had cooperated with the court, she determined that the maximum penalty was appropriate. The judge described Laura Simonson as a mother, daughter, sister, and friend. She said, "You will stay in prison long enough to ensure no one else suffers at your hands." Some members of Laura's family had hoped for a harsher punishment. Her daughter called him a monster and said, "Maybe while he rots in a cell, he'll understand the pain he caused." Because the two sentences are to be served consecutively, one after the other, Stephen Zellick will remain in prison for the rest of his life. There's no easy way to close a story like this. What happened to Laura and Jenny is heartbreaking beyond words. Both were mothers, both had been through unimaginable struggles, and both fell prey to a man who saw their vulnerability as opportunity.
Story number 4.
One October night in Alpine, Texas, something terrible happened inside a quiet apartment near the local university. What started as a normal evening between two people quickly turned dark. Neighbors heard arguing, strange noises, and then silence. The young woman who went inside never came out. She had big dreams, exciting plans for her future, and a bright path ahead. But that night, everything changed. What really happened behind that door? This is the story of Zuzu Verk, and the night that changed everything. Zuzu Renee Verk was born on April 22, 1995, in the close-knit community of Keller, Texas, to Lori and Glenn Verk. She grew up in a warm and loving household alongside her older brother Miles, who would later describe her as the brightest light in their lives, the kind of sister who made every day better just by being in it. Her name, Zuzu, carried a story as special as the girl herself. Inspired by the character Zuzu Bailey from the beloved holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life, Glenn and Lori had long agreed that if they ever had a daughter, that would be her name. And when Lori became pregnant in 1994, they held true to that promise. The name sparked curiosity wherever she went, and Zuzu would often joke about needing a business card just to explain it. Zuzu attended Timber Creek High School and, after graduation, moved to Alpine, Texas to study at the local university. The town's wide-open skies and natural beauty felt like home to her. It was the perfect backdrop for someone who had always felt deeply connected to the natural world. She majored in conservation biology, a choice that reflected her passion for protecting the planet's wild places and creatures. Her academic performance spoke volumes about her dedication. She'd recently made the dean's list, and had applied to transfer to Texas University to complete her senior year. Zuzu was more than a student. She was driven, idealistic, and fiercely goal-oriented. Her love for nature went beyond academics. It shaped her life's vision. After college, she dreamed of living abroad in Japan, where she hoped to combine her love of travel with her environmental advocacy. But in Alpine, her path intersected with that of Robert Fabian, a young man 4 years her senior. What began as an attraction eventually developed into a rocky and complicated relationship. Robert had a laid-back charm that initially drew Zuzu in, but those close to her, particularly her mother Lori and brother Miles, saw troubling signs. Lori thought Robert was self-centered and dismissive, and Miles viewed him as controlling. They both feared he didn't support Zuzu's ambitions, especially her plan to leave Alpine and move forward with her life. Zuzu herself seemed to share those concerns. Though she remained in the relationship, she admitted to her mother that she couldn't picture a future with Robert. It felt like a relationship built on convenience rather than true connection. Still, Zuzu remained kind and hopeful, characteristics that defined her, even as she prepared to break the news that she was transferring schools and moving on. The last conversation Lori had with her daughter was on October 10th, 2016. Zuzu was excited, ready to tell Robert that her transfer to Texas University was happening and that their relationship would be coming to an end. Robert had planned to take her to a movie the following night. Lori had no idea that would be the last time she'd ever hear her daughter's voice. When days passed without any word from Zuzu, panic quickly replaced routine concern. Zuzu was never one to ignore messages or go silent. Her parents, overwhelmed with worry, began reaching out to anyone who might have seen her. When Lori contacted Robert, he said he hadn't seen Zuzu and claimed to be giving her space. On October 14th, 2016, Zuzu was reported missing. A large-scale search was launched, pulling in local authorities, state officials, and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters scanned the desert, horse riders combed rugged trails, and search parties spanned hundreds of miles, even into Mexico. Flyers went up across town, and a $100,000 reward was announced in hopes of bringing Zuzu home. But optimism slowly faded. The investigation began pointing in a single direction, toward Robert Fabian. He told detectives that on the evening of October 11th, he and Zuzu had dinner at his apartment. He claimed the night soured after he brought up an ex-girlfriend, and Zuzu left sometime in the early morning hours. He said he called her later, but decided to back off when she didn't respond. That story didn't sit right with police. A crucial piece of evidence came from John Franco, a neighbor who lived directly below Robert. According to John, he saw Zuzu arrive and enter Robert's apartment the evening she disappeared. From his unit, he could hear the sounds of a typical evening: voices, laughter, and the clinking of dinnerware. But one moment stood out: a sudden and aggressive shut up that broke the rhythm of an otherwise ordinary night. Later, around 4 a.m., John noticed Robert leaving the apartment alone. Zuzu's car, however, remained parked outside. John had also heard what he described as arguments and strange thuds from above, details he didn't immediately consider alarming but would soon prove critical. When investigators revisited Robert with this new information, his story began to shift. He now claimed that after a disagreement about an ex-girlfriend, he went out for a drive to Dairy Queen to clear his head. By the time he returned, Zuzu was allegedly still there, but left shortly afterward. The inconsistency triggered enough suspicion for investigators to request a search of Robert's apartment, which he consented to. Inside, detectives were met with disturbing signs. The bed was stripped entirely of linens, and the mattress pad and other items, clothes and sheets, reeked of bleach. This, coupled with Robert's habit of speaking about Zuzu in the past tense, painted a chilling picture. It became increasingly clear to investigators that Zuzu's disappearance may have been far more sinister than initially believed. Attention soon widened beyond Robert. Another figure began to emerge, his longtime friend, Chris Estrada. The bond between the two men dated back to high school, and their closeness placed Chris under the microscope. What raised red flags was a national television appearance. On December 6, 2016, Chris appeared on Crime Watch Daily. Viewers and authorities alike took note of his stiff posture, awkward demeanor, and forced expressions. Phone records revealed that Robert had called Chris at 3:15 a.m. on October 12th, the same morning Zuzu vanished. During questioning, Chris admitted Robert had asked to borrow his credit card the day before, claiming he needed it to buy plastic painter's drop cloths for a project. This explanation immediately set off alarm bells. Why would someone need to purchase painting supplies in the middle of the night? Investigators found the logic implausible and the timing deeply suspect. Then came another key testimony. A friend named Brittany told investigators that Chris showed up at her apartment around midnight on October 13th, visibly shaken. He looked pale, anxious, like someone who had just seen something he couldn't forget. When Brittany asked what was wrong, Chris reportedly responded, "I don't want to get you involved." Despite these unsettling clues, the case stalled. All evidence was circumstantial. There was no body, no physical proof linking Robert directly to a crime. The Verk family, heartbroken and desperate, held press conferences pleading for answers. They urged Robert to come forward and help, but he remained silent. Weeks passed, then months. But on February 3rd, 2017, exactly 3 months after Zuzu went missing, everything changed. The police was patrolling a remote stretch of Brewster County, just outside Alpine, when something unusual caught his eye: a disturbed patch of earth. As they got closer, he noticed plastic peeking out from the dirt alongside a lone blue sock and a scrap of dark fabric. He immediately contacted authorities. When investigators arrived and began to dig, their worst fears were confirmed. Inside a shallow grave, wrapped in a plastic painter's drop cloth, was the body of Zuzu. DNA testing later confirmed the remains. The young woman full of life and dreams, who had planned to study at Texas University, who wanted to live in Japan, who loved the stars and the earth, had been found. The plastic wrap used to conceal her body matched the kind Robert had bought at Dollar General with Chris's borrowed credit card. It was the final piece. Within 24 hours of the discovery, Robert Fabian was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. 2 days later, Chris Estrada was taken into custody in Phoenix, Arizona, facing similar charges. Before long, Robert's charges were upgraded to murder. In April 2018, Chris accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against his best friend. He pleaded no contest to his involvement. Robert, however, continued to deny everything, pleading not guilty. His defense attorney insisted there was no direct physical evidence tying Robert to the murder. No fingerprints, no DNA. But prosecutors countered that his behavior in the aftermath, bleaching sheets, shifting stories, and obsessive interest in the case, spoke volumes. A co-worker even testified that Robert, once easygoing, had become erratic after Zuzu disappeared. He constantly asked about the investigation and showed an unnatural curiosity about law enforcement activity. These weren't the actions of a worried boyfriend. They were the habits of someone watching their own crime unfold in real time. For the Verk family, the trial brought pain, but also resolution. The truth, however brutal, had finally come to light. And in the end, Zuzu's memory lived on, not only in the hearts of her family, but in the legacy of a young woman who lived boldly, dreamed big, and deserved so much more. On the third day of the trial, the courtroom grew silent as Chris Estrada took the witness stand and delivered a confession that would change the course of the case. He recounted a night filled with desperation, phone calls, and a secret that no one was ever supposed to know. Chris testified that Robert Fabian had contacted him late at night, insisting it was a matter of life or death. During their conversation, Robert revealed that the evening with Zuzu had begun peacefully, but things had taken a violent turn. According to Chris, the situation escalated in the bedroom. An argument turned physical, and Robert eventually strangled Zuzu. As she began gasping for air and eventually stopped breathing, Robert panicked. He told Chris he had tried to revive her, performing CPR, but it was already too late. From that moment, Chris described Robert as going into survival mode, doing everything he could to cover his tracks. The claim that Zuzu's death was accidental, however, rang hollow. Strangulation is a deliberate and sustained act. It cannot be brushed off as a momentary lapse in control. Chris admitted that Robert called him repeatedly, over a dozen times, begging for help in disposing of Zuzu's body. At one point, Robert even appeared at Chris's doorstep in Alpine, pleading for assistance and asking him not to go to the police. Chris claimed he refused to participate, but also admitted he never reported what he knew. His silence would go on to haunt the investigation. Though he may not have been physically involved in Zuzu's death, his failure to speak out prolonged the family's agony and obstructed the search for justice. Whether out of fear, loyalty, or moral paralysis, Chris had chosen silence over truth, and it left Zuzu's family in the dark for months. Then, in a surprising twist, another voice entered the courtroom. Roy Roman, Robert's former cellmate at Brewster County Jail. Roy testified that Robert had privately confessed to killing Zuzu, allegedly because she had uncovered something he wanted hidden. According to Roy, Zuzu had discovered a possible romantic relationship between Robert and Chris and had threatened to reveal it. The fear of being exposed, Roy claimed, was what led Robert to silence her permanently. He described Robert as weeping in his cell, repeating the words, "I didn't mean to do this." On May 8, 2019, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Robert Fabian was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 29 years for evidence tampering. Chris Estrada, who had earlier accepted a plea deal and testified against Robert, was sentenced to 42 months in prison, along with fines for tampering with evidence and evading authorities. For Zuzu's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but no peace. Their beloved daughter was gone, and nothing would ever bring her back. Amid their grief, they received a cruel reminder of what might have been. A letter from Texas University confirming Zuzu's acceptance into the program she had worked so hard for. It had been her dream, but she was no longer alive to see it come true. In her honor, the university where Zuzu had studied and thrived renamed its amphitheater Zuzu's Place. The school also established a scholarship in natural resource management in her name, a fitting tribute to a young woman who had dedicated herself to protecting the beauty of the natural world. But the emotional wounds left by Zuzu's murder remain deep. Her brother Miles still thinks about her every day. The little moments, like watching her wash dishes or saying goodnight, now memories wrapped in both comfort and sorrow. The Verk family, devastated but determined, expressed immense gratitude to the Alpine community for their unwavering support. Without it, they said, they might not have survived the darkest chapter of their lives. Zuzu, was a dreamer. She had a vision for her life, a path filled with purpose, travel, and impact. But one person couldn't stand to see her grow beyond him. Robert tried to trap her in a world that revolved around him, and when she refused, he chose control over love, silence over respect, and violence over letting go. Her story is a devastating warning. Never stay in relationships that shrink you. Never allow someone to keep you from becoming who you're meant to be. Zuzu was on the verge of reclaiming her freedom, ready to step into the life she had imagined. But she didn't make it. Let her legacy serve as a reminder. Protect your dreams, guard your independence, and never let anyone convince you that you must choose between love and freedom.
Story number 5.
It was meant to be a normal night. Tracy Ocasio went out to watch a basketball game at her favorite bar in Oki, Florida. She was 27, full of dreams, and had every intention of going home after the game. But something changed that night. She met a man she didn't know well. She gave him a ride. And after that, she disappeared. The next day, her phone was off. Her car was found, left behind on a quiet, dark street. But Tracy was nowhere to be found. What really happened that night? And who was the last person to see her? Tracy Ocasio came into the world in 1982, born to Elizabeth, affectionately known as Liz, and Joseph Ocasio in the quiet town of Ocoee, Florida. From the very start, Tracy had a special connection with her father and was proudly known as a daddy's girl. Her heart was full of ambition and curiosity. She dreamed of pursuing a career in radiology and had an undeniable love for animals. Her pets ranged from scorpions and lizards to a fluffy cat named Cookie. Tracy also had a creative side. She loved crafting handmade jewelry during her downtime and often immersed herself in books, especially stories rooted in history and ancient civilizations like World War II and Rome. The Ocasio household was tightly knit. Tracy, even when out for the day, never failed to call her mom, keeping her updated on the little details of her life. After finishing high school, she picked up work as a waitress at a nearby restaurant while also enrolling in online college classes to chase her academic goals. At one point, Tracy left home to start a new chapter with her fiancé. But the engagement didn't last, and she eventually moved back in with her parents, a change they welcomed with open arms. Despite the setback, life at home was good, and she leaned on the comfort of family. Sports, particularly basketball, were something she and her dad deeply bonded over. The Orlando Magic was their team, and watching games together became a cherished ritual that Tracy never skipped. By age 27, Tracy was living a full and hopeful life. She had goals, strong family ties, and a clear sense of direction. But then came the day that changed everything. On May 26, 2009, Tracy was excited for the Orlando Magic playoff game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Originally, she had planned to watch it with her dad, but he had to run an unexpected work errand. So, Tracy decided to head to the Florida Tap Room on Raleigh Street by herself, a bar she frequented and where she knew many of the regulars. Packed with fellow basketball fans, it was a familiar and safe space for her. That night, she watched the game surrounded by cheers and energy. But after the final buzzer, something went wrong. Tracy never came home. Liz grew anxious when she didn't hear from her daughter after the game, especially since Tracy was always in touch. Even more concerning was the fact that Tracy had told her she planned to return home immediately after the game. Hours passed, calls went unanswered, and just like that, Tracy had vanished. The next day, her family filed a missing person report and the search began. Investigators turned to the last place she was seen, The Florida Tap Room. Surveillance footage from the bar provided a crucial clue. Tracy had been captured on camera leaving around 1 to 1:30 a.m. She wasn't alone. A bald man, roughly her age, was seen with her. They appeared to be enjoying themselves, chatting comfortably before walking out together. Neither Liz nor Joseph recognized the man. Tracy was wearing black jeans, a tank top, a hooded jacket, and a green and white hat that night. There was no sign of distress in the footage. She appeared alert and left willingly. Still, the identity of the man became the top lead for investigators. While they searched for him, a new development emerged. On the evening of May 27th, Tracy's yellow 2002 two-door Chevrolet Cobalt was discovered parked on Franklin Street in Oakwood. It was the same car she had driven to the bar the night before. The vehicle was left unlocked in a dark, isolated area. No streetlights, no traffic, no sign of life. It looked clearly abandoned. Inside, there were no personal belongings, no bag, no phone, nothing. The only detail that caught investigators' attention was that both front seats were reclined forward, as if someone had recently accessed the back seat or tried to help someone get in or out. That behavior didn't align with Tracy's habits. First off, she rarely used the back seat of her two-door car. It was cramped and not ideal for an adult. If she had anything with her, it likely would have been stored in the trunk. Adding to the concern, her father Joseph made it clear. Tracy hated dark areas and would have never willingly parked in such a spot unless she had no choice. So, the question loomed. Why was her car left there? The answer came swiftly. The man seen with Tracy on the night of May 26th was finally identified. His name was James Hadaway. Detectives reached out to him, and surprisingly, he was open to talking. James explained that he met Tracy at the Florida Tap Room. They chatted during the game, and afterward, he asked her for a ride since he didn't have a car. According to him, Tracy dropped him off and drove away. But here's where things got strange. Tracy's car had been found just a few yards from James's home, where he lived with his father. Now, not only was James the last person to see Tracy, but her abandoned car was basically on his doorstep. Suspicion grew fast. Investigators dug into Tracy's phone data. Her phone had shut off around 8:30 a.m. on May 27th, the morning after the game. And the last pinged location? Right where her car had been found. That gave police just enough cause to get a search warrant for James's house. Inside, there was no sign of Tracy, no clues, no items of hers, but there was a large amount of drugs. As it turned out, James had been using drugs while out on bond, which led to his arrest. And that's when more disturbing information came to light. James had a long criminal history, including charges related to juvenile kidnapping. Not long after his arrest, two witnesses stepped forward, friends of James, who said they'd seen him leave the bar that night with a woman matching Tracy's description. One even claimed Tracy went into James's home and hung out there briefly. James had allegedly encouraged her to try drugs, but she refused. After that, she reportedly left. That directly contradicted James's earlier claim that she had only dropped him off. His story was unraveling. Though he wasn't charged in connection with Tracy's disappearance, James was now in custody and unable to flee. Meanwhile, detectives poured all available resources into finding Tracy. They brought in bloodhounds and cadaver dogs, but oddly, the dogs couldn't even detect her scent in her own car. As police continued their investigation, Tracy's father took matters into his own hands. Joseph plastered flyers across Ocoee, searching parks, streets, and abandoned lots, anywhere his daughter might have ended up. With no progress, the family reached out to Tim Miller, the founder of Texas EquuSearch, for help. Volunteers combed over 2,500 acres of land, but there was still no sign of Tracy. All the while, detectives kept questioning James. Though he remained tight-lipped about Tracy, they had growing suspicions. At this point, nearly a month had passed since her disappearance. Digging further into James Hadaway's background revealed a deeply troubling history. He had been in and out of trouble from a young age: drug abuse, random jobs, shady activities like helping his father dredge ponds and illegally dump debris. He was already facing charges, but as he stood trial, new layers of his past emerged. People who knew James came forward with disturbing stories. One common thread was his sudden mood shifts. He could flip from friendly to violent without warning. Several women shared experiences of feeling unsafe around him. Then came the most chilling account, one that mirrored Tracy's case almost exactly. Nearly a year before Tracy vanished, another woman named Rachel Clark had agreed to give James a ride home. As they said goodbye, James embraced her, then snapped. He violently attacked Rachel, tackling her to the ground and whispering, "Don't make me kill you." She fought back, screaming, until a stranger passing by intervened and scared James off. Rachel survived, but she was left with severe bruising, scratches, and trauma. Her account was a haunting echo of Tracy's last known moments with James. Though no charges were filed against James in Tracy's case at the time, he had become the prime suspect. His lies, criminal history, proximity to Tracy's abandoned car, and violent past made him the center of the investigation. What made things even more maddening was the fact that James Hadaway was never charged for his brutal attack on Rachel Clark. She had filed a police report, but by the time detectives tried to locate him, he had seemingly vanished until nearly a year later, when he resurfaced as the main suspect in Tracy's disappearance. Once James was back on the radar, investigators reopened Rachel's case. They were determined to keep him behind bars, especially now that they strongly suspected he was involved in Tracy's vanishing. Meanwhile, the search for Tracy continued. Then, something unexpected happened. Something just as disturbing as her disappearance. On February 22, 2011, almost 2 years after Tracy went missing, detectives were searching Lake Carter, which had mostly dried up. During the search, they discovered what appeared to be human remains. First, they found part of a spine and a skull. As the lake continued to drain, more bones emerged. 2 days later, on February 24th, authorities also recovered a wallet, an ID card, and a cell phone nearby. The name on the ID, Christopher George. This wasn't the breakthrough detectives expected. They were hoping to find answers about Tracy, and instead, they stumbled upon a completely different individual. But who was Chris George? As it turned out, Chris and Tracy didn't know each other, but there was someone who did have a connection to both: James Hadaway. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Chris. That added a new layer to the case, and police began looking into the possible link between him and James. Around that time, multiple tips were pouring in. One particularly chilling call was made anonymously to Tracy's father. The caller claimed to know a woman who had acted as an accomplice to James, and according to her, James had been involved in 3 separate homicides in the Orlando area. The tipster also said that the bodies, along with the murder weapons, were dumped in local lakes. That claim was the driving force behind the lake searches. While the tip could have been bogus, detectives couldn't afford to ignore it, especially with James's violent history. Eventually, they discovered that Chris had last been seen with James and another individual in early February 2009, which was shortly after James assaulted Rachel but before Tracy vanished. Chris, who lived in Apopka, had been reported missing on February 11, 2009. Witnesses told police they had seen James and another man walking out of a wooded area, acting strangely. A patrol officer had even stopped them that night. When questioned, James told the officer that his friend Chris was high. and needed help. The officer let them go without further investigation. Not long after, Chris's vehicle was found abandoned at Lake Carter, the same place where his remains and belongings were later recovered. When authorities confirmed Chris's identity, they contacted his family. The George and the Ocasios, though complete strangers, found an unfortunate connection through tragedy. Both families were devastated and united by their shared grief, desperate to see justice done. Unfortunately, Chris's autopsy results were inconclusive due to advanced decomposition. No official cause of death could be determined. While James's presence at the scene raised serious concerns, there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him in connection with Chris's death. But detectives weren't giving up. They knew they had a strong case in Rachel's assault, and that's where they decided to begin. At the time, James was sitting in Seminole County Jail on unrelated charges. But now, with Rachel's testimony and physical evidence, they were ready to take him to court. In May 2011, the trial for the attempted murder of Rachel Clark began. The centerpiece of the prosecution was Rachel herself. With remarkable strength, she took the stand and recounted in vivid detail how James had turned on her the night she gave him a ride. Her description of the attack was chilling, how he suddenly snapped, tackled her to the ground, and began violently assaulting her while whispering threats. James sat in court with a blank expression, listening as his actions were laid bare. His defense team argued that he had been drunk and incoherent, with no recollection of what happened that night. They tried to shift focus, suggesting the incident had been a misunderstanding caused by substance abuse. But then the jury was shown photos of Rachel's injuries, her bruised neck, scratched arms, and battered face. The impact was immediate and undeniable. The courtroom fell silent. The horror of her ordeal left a lasting impression on everyone present. And with that, the case against James Hadaway took a darker and more damning turn. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom, this wasn't the result of drunken confusion or a heat-of-the-moment mistake. The attack on Rachel Clark had been deliberate, violent, and terrifying. After a tense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. James Hadaway was found guilty of attempted murder, along with burglary, robbery, and false imprisonment. The sentence was life in prison. As the judge read the decision, the courtroom seemed to collectively exhale. After the sentencing, James stood and addressed the court, offering an apology to Rachel. "Her injuries were my fault, and I do apologize for what happened," he said. "I know I didn't try to kill her, but I'm sorry for what did occur." But for many in that room, his words rang hollow. To think that he could inflict so much trauma and then simply say, "sorry," as if that might somehow erase it all, it was infuriating. Rachel had fought for her life. She had carried the physical and emotional scars of that night, and no apology could undo that. As for Tracy's case, investigators were forced to admit the painful truth. They likely weren't going to get justice for her. Everyone involved had a strong suspicion about who was responsible, but there simply wasn't enough evidence to bring formal charges. James remained the prime suspect, but suspicion alone isn't enough for a conviction. After the trial, Tracy's father, Joseph, spoke publicly. "If there's any comfort," he said, "it's that he's behind bars and won't destroy another family like he destroyed ours." Then, in a twist that stunned everyone, James appealed his conviction in 2015. He claimed that his attorneys had pressured him into waiving his right to a speedy trial. His appeal was granted, and a new hearing was held, but the result didn't change. James Hadaway remained sentenced to life in prison. 15 years have passed since Tracy was last seen leaving the Florida Tap Room, a place she knew and loved. No calls, no texts, no sightings, nothing. Her disappearance has left a gaping hole in the lives of her parents, Joseph and Liz, who continue to fight for answers. They've lived with heartbreak, fear, and hope, often all at once. Joseph still struggles with guilt. He often thinks back to the night Tracy went out alone. In his heart, he believes that if he had been with her, things might have turned out differently. But this wasn't his fault. No one could have predicted what was going to happen. If blame belongs anywhere, it's with James. But without solid evidence, justice remains out of reach. Despite everything, the case is still open. Detective David Gray continues to follow up on every lead that comes in, no matter how small. The Ocasio family holds on to the hope that one day they'll know the truth. Because no family should have to endure what they have. Missing persons cases are especially cruel. It's not just the lack of justice, it's the absence of answers, the constant uncertainty, the haunting feeling of not knowing. And when the person suspected of doing harm is already behind bars, but the victim's whereabouts remain a mystery, it's a cruel kind of limbo. In the end, it's a painful reminder that life can change in a single moment, and when it does, the consequences can last forever.